The Hellfire Club. Before I start, from the beginning of researching this group of privileged elitists who enjoyed some notoriety, I very nearly gave up on the whole idea of a video. But then I considered the history and the impact it had on the paranormal world, so I plodded on. You see, for many, the Hellfire Club is a terrifying story of demons and even the devil himself. For myself, it seems to have started because some young, wealthy politician who enjoyed life to its fullest, because he could, found some of his peers who were like-minded. The terms used back in 1718 called these fellow club members rakes. No, not the kind you hear of in a fantasy horror film. Well, maybe it does mean that to some people, but the rake here is a person who enjoys wine, women and song, spending money freely, usually inherited funds. These clubs were not unusual for the times. They had many different names, but generally set up for a similar reason. For instance, in the 1600s, there was the much more aptly named Merry Gang of Courtiers. I'm seriously trying hard to keep on track while the Hellfire Club becomes a notorious demonic hangout for the devil and his minions, and not just a group of people who took their entitlement too far, pushing their privilege boundaries for the time and the strong religious beliefs at the time way beyond blasphemous. The first official Hellfire Club was founded in London in 1718 by a young Philip, Duke of Wharton. Although it was founded in London, the Duke lived in Ireland and was a member of the Irish House of Lords. By all accounts, not a very likeable man, but he was good at his job and accepted because of his heritage and education. He was known for his inappropriateness towards people he didn't agree with or didn't have his political beliefs. His club mainly consisted of his peers who enjoyed frolicking in their wealth and ridiculing religion. Now, this is where the interesting part comes into play. Somewhat. The club was meant as a light-hearted joke, a dig at society's religious beliefs. They didn't, apparently, worship the devil, and they themselves didn't see any harm in what they were doing, even calling themselves devils. The president would be known as the devil. The club was designed for shock purposes. They let in both male and females. They met on a Sunday at different locations. The Greyhound Tavern in London was a favourite, but at that time women were not allowed to be seen in taverns, so they would meet in members' homes. They would have lavish meals that would consist of such foods like ghost pie and the wonderfully named Hellfire Punch. Robert Walpole managed to disgrace Wharton in 1721 by getting the king to pass a law against horrid immorality, which was aimed at the Hellfire Club. This in turn would have him removed from Parliament, and the Hellfire Club got disbanded. There's obviously more to this story that revolves mostly around politics, and I'm not going to go into that. Wharton was disgraced and would financially struggle. He began stealing food from acquaintances and seeking money wherever he could get it. He sold back his title to George I before taking a position in the Jacobite forces as a lieutenant colonel. This led to him being tried for treason in England and would never return home. He passed away in Catalonia, 1731. Then came the most notable club started by Sir Francis Dashwood. He was the founder of the Order of the Knights of St. Francis in 1746, but before that it was thought that he and the Earl of Sandwich met often at a dining club held at the George and Vulture Inn in the 1730s. This is believed to have been attended by the remnants of the former Hellfire Club that was dissolved by Wharton. According to documents, while on a grand tour to different countries, he visited many religious seminaries where he found them to be devoid of the natural nature and reasoning in life. So on his return to England, he decided to show how he felt on the absurdity of these religious societies. Now, Dashwood was well known for his sense of humour. Whether it was tasteful or not, he would often be in the public eye for his practical jokes, of which he did many, and for the trouble it got him into. So Dashwood would start his own club, offering some gaiety by caricaturing the serious matter of religion. The first meeting of his club, called Brotherhood of Francis of Wickham, was held in 1552 at Sir Francis's home, but it wasn't a success. They moved their meetings to Medmenham Abbey, a run-down shell of an abbey that Dashwood rented from his half-brother. He renovated the abbey, turning it into a place of opulence, and called themselves the Monks of Medmenham. By 1755 they were successful, with more members, and the meetings became more popular. They then were given the name the Hellfire Club, not by themselves, but by the people who deplored them and their activities. Dashwood's club motto hung above the abbey door, written in Latin, and I couldn't even begin to try and say it. Translated, it means, "Do what thou wilt," or "Do what you will." The motto was taken from a philosophy of life book written by a French writer in the 1400s. The book told of a fictional monastery that wasn't your usual monastic abbey. It allowed both monks and nuns. It had some more modern features like a swimming pool. But what stands out more is who it didn't welcome, i.e. hypocrites, bigots, heretic burners and grinchers. The Hellfire Club lived up to its name, consisting of acts of drunken debauchery, holding orgies and acting out biblical scenes in their own way. Dashwood, now 50 years old, was said to be the more vulgar of the group, and would pour drinks from a chalice into the open mouths of the other revellers. Some of their acts were said to be so bad that those that experienced a meeting wouldn't talk about it. Many who knew some of the members of this club shunned them, calling them a disgrace to mankind. But you have the high-ranking members, politicians, artists, writers. The group started at 12, eventually growing to, well, nobody really knows. Nobody knows who really belonged to the club, except for the main associated names. Dashwood, Thomas Potter, who was thought to be just as bad as Dashwood, and Paul Whitehouse, secretary to the club. They were apparently the worst. And yet they carried on their careers, as was normal back then. It wasn't uncommon for those with titles and wealth to be able to carry out their duties in the government without involving their other activities. And to be honest, back then they were quite open about their actions. Well, because there wasn't really any ramifications for them. So they could quite easily get away with certain things. Being shunned by their peers, family, colleagues, didn't appear to shake them. Only losing their titles, property, or money seemed to be a deterrent. But in those days, that was rare. If anything, they would prosper. As for the Hellfire Club, by the 1760s, its popularity had started to fade, so Sir Francis stripped the abbey bare and left it bereft of any incriminating evidence. The Hellfire Caves. The abbot and his brothers move in. Once the abbey was left behind, the meetings were held in the caves. During the late 1740s, Sir Francis Dashwood commissioned an ambitious project to supply chalk for a straight 3-mile road between West Wickham and High Wycombe. Now, local farm workers who were impoverished by a succession of droughts and failed harvests from 1748 to 1750 were employed to tunnel beneath the ground and mine the chalk and flint. Apparently Sir Francis wanted to help the locals who were struggling, and they were paid 1 shilling a day, which back then was enough for them to live on. The chalk was also used to build some houses, the village church, and the mausoleum. Considering they were all dug by hand, the caves were often regarded as an incredible feat of engineering. They were tunnelled through the hillside on land owned by Dashwood, and they stretched beneath St. Lawrence's Church and the mausoleum. The entrance to the caves resembles a church, and as you go through the tunnels, the individual rooms, named after the former prominent members, are passed as you reach the huge banqueting hall, and eventually crossing the River Styx, you enter the inner temple, where the meetings of the Hellfire Club were held. It is said to lie 300 feet directly beneath the church, and it's thought to signify heaven and hell. Nobody really knows why they carried on digging the tunnels or why they became what they did, but the most likely and most general reasoning comes from people knowing Sir Dashwood's sense of humour and lifestyle. The engraved pictures on the walls are of certain parts of the human anatomy I'm not supposed to mention on YouTube, so just let your imagination run riot on that one. The meetings that were moved from the Medmenham Abbey to the caves would last for more than a week at times, and were said to be linked with black magic, Satanism, and quite definitely drunken orgies. Personally, I think that because of the times, their behaviour went against the church, and that was definitely unheard of. So they could only be seen as worshippers of Satan. Saying that, the actual activities performed in not only the temple, but all of the offshoot rooms were said to be so depraved that even Caligula himself would have blushed. Only the locals, and obviously the members, really knew where these caves were. Over time, the mock rituals were, in my opinion, done as satire, became more realistic to outsiders. As with all things that remain secretive, the twists and turns through Chinese whispers could have led to the summarization that the meetings were more satanic, blasphemous, and drunken shenanigans, with mock Christian rituals and even allegedly holding a black mass with the wearing of a uniform of specific clothing. It all culminated in a darker and more mysterious legend. The Hellfire Club's popularity and secrecy came to an end when John Wilkes played a prank on the Earl of Sandwich involving a baboon. He didn't take kindly to this. In fact, he was very angry. So, in 1764, the Earl of Sandwich read out the indecent poem by Thomas Potter and John Wilkes, titled Essay on Woman, to show his fellow lords just what the Hellfire Club was like. Cries of blasphemy, disgust, and an enraged House of Lords wanted Wilkes arrested. Wilkes fled to France and was declared an outlaw. Obviously there is more to this involving politics, but that's a different story. In 1951, the 11th Baronet, also named Sir Francis Dashwood, reopened the caves. After years of being locked away, they weren't in the best condition. The keeper of the gates would charge a small fee, and those that ventured in were given a candle to light their way. Now, there had always been stories of apparitions inside the caves ever since they had been dug out. Where they evolved from, well, who knows? The news of the caves became widespread, and many more people wanted to see them, especially when a newspaper article wrote that the local vicar felt uneasy near the caves, and he held a sermon to vanquish any evil that resided there. The then Sir Francis was sceptical of this, and said that if any evil resided there, the sceptical eyes of the public would prove it non-existent. The attraction blew up, not literally. They had more than 10,000 visitors over the summer, and interest continued. With the extra interest the money brought in, it could be used to make the tunnels safe and bring it back to some sort of originality. The tunnels were closed while the Baron and some expert miners worked on them overnight and through weekends, digging by hand. This brought the cave attraction more up to date, and over the years the caves and tunnels have been made completely safe, with electricity added and more tourist attractions. As for the Hellfire Club meetings in the caves, they had started to diminish, and the days of the order were nearly over when Paul Whitehead, the steward, died in 1774. Yes, they held ritual ceremonies and dressed in robes, but the main purpose of the meetings was, as one prominent member, John Wilkes, put it, that a set of worthy jolly fellows, happy disciples of Venus and Bacchus, got occasionally together to celebrate woman in wine and to give more zest to the festive meetings. They plucked every luxurious idea from the ancients and enriched their own modern pleasures with the tradition of classic luxury. Are the caves haunted? I don't know. It's a possibility with all the energy from those exotic, lavish and frenzied meetings. It's said that a young woman called Suki, who thought her fiancé wanted to see her, was attacked by a group of men in the caves, and she unfortunately died from her injuries. It's thought that she wanders the caves looking for her fiancé. Chanting has apparently been heard from the temple. People have claimed to have been touched, and others have feelings of complete terror. There are many ghost hunts held there. That alone could stir up activity. It's the perfect place for ghosts. It's dark and quiet, with a very rich and rather sordid past.